Welcome to Midnight Casebook, where every shadow hides a secret and every mystery begs to be solved. Tonight, we unravel the chilling tale of Father Brown's most terrifying case, a fan-made story paying homage to the brilliance of G.K. Chesterton's legendary detective. We'd love to have you along for this enigmatic journey. Drop a comment to let us know where you're watching from, share your theories, and if you spot any inconsistencies, don't hesitate to call them out. Your keen eyes and sharp minds help us craft even more captivating mysteries in the future. Chapter 1. The Saint with Black Hands. It was raining again, the kind of rain that made sins run down the gutters like blood from an old wound. Father Brown stood beneath the flickering lamplight on Greyburn Street, a figure too small for the city that loomed around him. Leaning tenement buildings, cracked neon signs, stuttering above boarded windows, alleyways that chewed up men and spit out legends. He was motionless in his threadbare cassock and battered hat, holding a black umbrella, like a priest would a candle during a requiem. Across from him, a man emerged from the fog like a secret best left unspoken. Tall, sharp-shouldered, coat collar turned up against the cold. A dim cigarette glowed like a fallen star beneath his pale face. "She never forgave me," the man said, voice thin as vapor. And then he was gone, swallowed by the mist, as if the street itself had devoured him. Father Brown remained, gazing quietly at the spot where the stranger had stood. He had seen the way the man's eyes darted, not with guilt, but with fear, an old kind of fear, like a boy expecting the strap. Father Brown had a curious gift for detecting what wasn't said, and in those 4 words, "She never forgave me," he'd heard something else. Remorse wrapped in warning. That same night, St. Dominic's Church echoed with the low creak of its ancient doors. The janitor, a gaunt man with whiskey breath and honest hands, found the body. It was slumped inside the confessional booth, kneeling like a penitent, hands folded over a chest that had stopped breathing. A single bullet had done the work, neat and clean. Father Brown was called down from the rectory. The corpse was still warm. The man was Simon Hargrave, a name that once meant something in the city. A banker turned loan shark, turned blackmailer, turned philanthropist. In that order. A man who built himself out of bricks of guilt and mortar of secrets. He'd bought saints and sold devils, depending on who paid more. But even sinners fear the dark, and Hargrave had been hiding from something. Inspector Mallory arrived 10 minutes later, smelling of cigars and cheap aftershave, his tan trench coat soaked at the edges. He looked at Father Brown like a man who's seen a bloodstain on his sermon. "Any idea what he was doing here, Father?" Father Brown's eyes twitched toward the confessional. "Perhaps seeking forgiveness," he said, "or perhaps he only wanted to pretend." Mallory scowled. "And the shooter?" "The one who didn't believe in forgiveness, perhaps," Father Brown said, almost softly. "But I think it's more complicated than that." The inspector grunted and walked off. He never liked when Father Brown talked like that, like sin was more real than motive, and a lie more dangerous than a gun. Later, back in his study, Father Brown studied the photograph that had been taken from Hargrave's pocket. A woman, eyes dark as rain-slick coal, lips painted in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. There was something old-fashioned about the curve of her collar, the way her gaze was turned ever so slightly to the left. On the back of the photo, the smudged ink read only, "Tell her the debts are paid." The next morning was grey and thick with fog. Father Brown walked through Greyburn like a man looking for a forgotten memory. At the corner of Ash Lane and Weller, he entered the Black Ribbon, a bar where the neon never quite worked, and the music came from a jukebox that hadn't been updated since Prohibition. Inside was a woman in a red dress who looked like she'd been waiting decades for someone to break her heart properly. She went by Lydia Varn. Everyone in the city knew her name, but not her story. She sang at the club once before her voice gave out and her reputation took over. She was the sort of woman hard-boiled men called trouble, but Father Brown called someone's daughter. She lit a cigarette with a gold lighter that bore a crucifix, an odd contradiction, like lipstick on a statue. "You're the priest who found Hargrave," she said, voice smoky, not from the cigarette, but from something deeper. "I didn't find him," Father Brown corrected. "I merely bore witness." "Same thing," she said, blowing smoke. "You're not like the others. Most men flinch around death." "Most men also lie around it," he said simply. She smiled, but it was too slow. "You think I killed him?" Father Brown sipped tea. The bartender brought him out of pity or fear. But I think you knew he would die." She didn't respond, but her hands tensed, just slightly around the cigarette. "I think," Father Brown continued, "that you loved him once, and he did something that made you stop." Lydia crushed out the cigarette. "You talk like God knows all the endings already." "No," Father Brown said. "He only sees what men refuse to." Lydia stood. "Tell Mallory what you want, but if you're looking for a choir girl, try another parish." "I'm not looking for choir girls," he said, as she walked away. "I'm looking for saints with black hands." The next few days bled together like spilled ink. Hargrave's accounts were frozen, his apartment ransacked. Nothing useful turned up, but in his diary, hidden beneath floorboards, stained with old guilt, was a single page torn from a prayer book and the address of a woman named Beatrice Vale. She lived in a house that leaned like it had a secret. When Father Brown knocked, the door creaked open without touch. She was older than the woman in the photograph, but the eyes were the same, cold and too full of memory. "I told him never to come here again," she said, without invitation. Father Brown stepped inside. He was found dead in the church. She turned her back. "How fitting." Father Brown let silence settle. "He carried your photograph." She said nothing. He wrote, "The debts are paid." Her shoulders moved once, too tight to be a shrug. He paid them late, and not in full. Father Brown looked at the crucifix above the door, tarnished and cracked. "Forgiveness isn't about what's fair." She looked at him sharply. "You don't know what he did." "I don't," he agreed. "But I know that the heart is not a ledger, Miss Vale. It keeps different kinds of records." That night, someone broke into the sacristy at St. Dominic's. They didn't take anything. They left something. A silver rosary, dangling from the neck of a statue of Saint Jude, the patron of lost causes. Tied to it was a strip of red velvet, the kind found on the seats of the confessionals. Father Brown showed it to Mallory, who grunted. "A message?" "Yes," Father Brown said, "from someone who knows that guilt never dies. It just changes clothes." The trail led next to a man named Teddy Knox, small-time enforcer, big-time coward, found in a gutter near the river with a mouthful of broken teeth. He claimed a priest had warned him to keep away from Lydia, a priest in black, with a silver cross and hands that didn't tremble. Not Father Brown. "There is someone," Lydia whispered the next night, when she returned to the Black Ribbon. "Another priest, or someone dressed like one." Hargrave used to talk about him, said he was the only one who knew the whole story, said he had a book of names. Father Brown frowned. There are men who dress like the faithful, but worship only revenge. She nodded. He called him the saint with black hands, like he was trying to wash the blood off. It was then that Father Brown understood. Hargrave had tried to repent, but someone wanted punishment, not penance. Someone who had worn the collar once, or maybe just stole one. The final piece came when the church's old ledger turned up missing. In its place was a single card, tucked beneath Father Brown's pillow, a funeral mass card. It bore the name Father Elias Merton, a priest excommunicated 5 years prior after a scandal involving missing charity funds and a woman who vanished without a trace. The woman had been Beatrice Vale's sister. The final confrontation happened in the catacombs beneath the church, stone corridors that hadn't echoed with prayer in decades. Father Brown followed candlelight to find Elias Merton waiting, cassock faded, hands clasped like a man still pretending at faith. "You found me," Merton said, "but not soon enough." "You killed Hargrave," Father Brown said. "He confessed," Merton said, eyes wild. "He confessed that he ruined her, that he left her in the gutter while he rose to glory. He deserved justice." "No," Father Brown said, calm as dawn. "He deserved forgiveness. Justice is for God. Vengeance is just pride, with a pistol." Merton's hand hovered near his coat. "You don't understand." "I do," Father Brown said. "You were once a priest. Then you let your hatred wear your collar." There was a moment of breathless silence. Then Merton dropped his hand. The pistol clattered to the stone. He wept, not like a killer, but like a child lost too long. "They arrested him at dawn," Mallory grumbled. "I still don't understand how you knew." "I didn't," Father Brown said. "I only knew who could not have done it, and who had the most reason to believe they had the right." Mallory shook his head. "You're not a detective, Father." "No," Father Brown said, eyes heavy with the weight of the city's darkness. "I'm a witness." Outside, the rain finally stopped, but the streets still glistened, like the city itself couldn't quite wash off what it had done. Chapter 2. A Confession in Smoke. The dead man was Simon Hargrave, a banker with too much pride and too many enemies. His sins were sealed in the smoke of his last unspoken confession. They found him folded like prayer inside the confessional at St. Dominic's, a single bullet through the heart, hands still clasped like he thought death might absolve him. Detective Inspector Mallory wanted answers. Father Brown, standing in the shadows near the candlelit altar, only wanted silence, to think, to listen. Outside, the rain patted the stained glass like a mourner unsure if it should knock or turn away. Hargrave's pockets yielded little. A torn photograph of a woman with cold, dark eyes, a silver money clip, blood-flecked, and a note, scrawled in ink that hadn't had time to dry before the heart stopped beating. "Tell her the debts are paid." There was no signature, but it didn't need one. The world Hargrave came from didn't deal in names, only favors and scars. Father Brown turned the photo over in his fingers. The woman in it looked like someone who'd never once asked for mercy and never granted it either. Eyes made for looking through a man, not at him. Eyes that had seen too much, perhaps more than they wanted. There was something familiar about the curve of her jaw, the way her mouth seemed to smirk without smiling. Not beauty exactly, but danger made flesh. Mallory was pacing like a man who thought motion could make answers fall out of the walls. "You think it was a hit?" He muttered, mostly to himself. Maybe one of the old creditors. Or a woman. Could be both. Father Brown watched the shadows shift on the marble floor. You're asking the wrong question. Mallory turned. Oh? And what's the right one, Father? Why now? Father Brown said quietly. A man like Hargrave, he's been stealing absolution with every breath for 20 years. Why come here to confess tonight of all nights? Mallory rolled his eyes. Because he was scared. And scared men pray when they think the dark is finally catching up. Yes, Father Brown said. But he wasn't praying. Not really. He was rehearsing, making a show of contrition. But he never truly spoke. He was interrupted. By a bullet. By someone who believed in justice more than forgiveness. Mallory lit a cigarette, the flame snapping like a miniature gunshot in the sanctuary's hush. That's a real poetic way to describe murder. Father Brown didn't answer. He was thinking about the woman in the photo, the way Hargrave's fingers had curled around it like it might defend him against whatever ghosts he thought were knocking. That evening, Greyburn was all puddles and low whispers. The city smelled of wet asphalt and old sins. Father Brown walked alone past shuttered stores and blinking red lights, past broken windows that offered glimpses of lives already too broken to matter. He ended up at the Velvet Mercy, a lounge buried behind a pawn shop, its sign flickering like it was gasping for breath. Inside was smoke and saxophone, bodies pressed close in the dark. The bartender poured gin with dead eyes, and the woman singing on stage wore sorrow like perfume. Father Brown sat near the back, unnoticed by most except for one. She came out of the shadows wearing the same smirk from the photo. Dark hair, coal eyes, red lips drawn sharp like a weapon. She wore a dress that said she understood what men wanted, and a gaze that said she didn't care. She didn't ask who he was. She already knew. Father Brown, she said, voice like old velvet. You look like you wandered in here by mistake. Maybe I did, he replied. Or maybe I came to ask you about Simon Hargrave. She blinked slowly. Simon's dead. Yes. And you think I killed him? No, said Father Brown. I think you mourned him. That made her pause. You don't look like a man who deals in feelings. I'm not, he said. But I deal in confessions, and grief is just guilt with nowhere to go. She sipped her drink and stared at the stage, but her mind was somewhere darker. He owed me something, she said. Not money, not that it mattered. He owed me the truth. Did he ever give it to you? She smiled without joy. Too late, just like everything else. Did he say what the debt was? She didn't answer, just looked at him, the way people look when they want to tell the truth, but fear what it will sound like. Finally, she said, You'll find a man named Dent. Lucian Dent. He used to work for Simon, kept the books. He knows where the bodies are. Figuratively, Father Brown stood slowly. I'm afraid in this city, that word's often literal. She reached into her purse and slid a card across the table. It smelled faintly of lilies and smoke. Lucian Dent, accounting and collections. Father Brown left without looking back. Her voice followed him like a benediction spoken backward. Careful, Father. Some debts get collected in blood. Dent's office was in a crumbling building that looked like it had tried to jump off a bridge and failed. The hallway stank of mildew and broken promises. Dent himself was rat-like, in a grey suit 2 sizes too big, chain-smoking like he was trying to burn the guilt out of his lungs. He tried to act unimpressed when Father Brown entered, but his hands twitched. "I don't have anything to confess, Padre." "I'm not here for your confession," Father Brown said gently. "I'm here for your clarity." Dent snorted. "Simon's dead. That much I heard." "Yes, you kept his books. I kept his secrets." "And are you ready to share them?" Dent leaned forward. "You ever see a ledger so red? The ink starts to look like it's breathing. Simon didn't just ruin people. He owned them. If he wrote your name in that book, you either paid or you disappeared." "And what about her?" Father Brown slid the photograph across the desk. Dent's eyes flicked to it, then away. "She was the exception. He owed her. Deeply. Never said why, but he never collected. Gave her money, even when he shouldn't have. Out of love? Out of fear." "Fear of what?" "Of what she knew, of what she could do, or maybe of himself." Father Brown pocketed the photo. "Did you kill him?" Dent's laugh was dry and broken. "No, Father, but whoever did, it wasn't a stranger." Father Brown left just as two men in dark coats came up the stairs. Their eyes lingered too long. Their smiles were the kind you didn't want to see in a rearview mirror. They didn't speak to him, but Father Brown felt the temperature of the hallway drop. There are men who carry winter in their souls, and they just walked in. Later that night, Father Brown returned to the rectory. Someone had been inside. Nothing stolen. Just a single item left on his desk. A page torn from a hymnal. "Deliver us from evil." Scrawled beneath, in ink that slanted like a drunk's walk, were the words, "You're in too deep, priest." He stared at it, then quietly folded it and slid it into his coat pocket. The next morning, Lucian Dent was found hanging from a lamppost on Ash Lane. His mouth was stuffed with ledger pages. The coroner said it was suicide. Mallory said it was a message. Father Brown said it was guilt. Mallory wasn't buying it. "This is getting out of hand." "It already was," Father Brown said. "We're just finally seeing the rot." Mallory ran a hand through thinning hair. "Then what's next?" Father Brown looked toward the confessional. The final debt. That evening, he returned to the Velvet Mercy. The woman was waiting, though she pretended not to be. She lit a cigarette with a hand that didn't shake, but her eyes betrayed her. He sat down beside her without a word. "Dent's dead," she said. "Yes." "You think I did that too?" "No," he said, "but I think you knew it would happen." She didn't answer. "Why did you give me his name?" "Because I wanted someone to stop it, even if it was too late." Father Brown studied her. "You were Simon Hargrave's sister." Her eyes widened, just slightly, then narrowed. "How did you know?" "You both smirk the same way, and grief, no matter how disguised, has a family resemblance." She stubbed out the cigarette. "He ruined her," she said. "Our mother took everything, left her in an asylum. I saw what he did to people. I wanted to hate him. I did hate him, but he was still my brother." "And you hired the killer?" "No," she said. "But I spoke his name, and sometimes, Father, that's enough." Father Brown stood. "Words are the beginning of every sin, and the end of many lives." She reached out, suddenly desperate. "What do I do now?" He looked down at her with infinite sadness. "You confess." She broke into tears. The next day, a man was arrested. A former priest turned fixer, Elias Merton. The same name from the card left under Father Brown's pillow. He had served time for embezzlement, changed his collar for a contract book. When caught, he simply said, "He confessed. I delivered judgment." At the trial, Father Brown sat in the back. The woman didn't attend. Later, Mallory asked him, "Do you think it's over?" Father Brown shook his head. "Not until she forgives him. And herself." Mallory sighed. "You really think that matters?" "I know it does," Father Brown said, "because it's not just crime we're chasing, Inspector. It's sin, and sin has a longer shadow than death." Chapter 3: The Whispering Gargoyle. The city had a way of keeping its worst secrets in high places. Most looked to the alleys and cellars for the rot, but Father Brown had always known that evil doesn't just lurk below, it watches from above. That's what brought him to the roof of St. Dominic's, past rusting ladders and windswept eaves, to where the old gargoyle sat, half-eroded, monstrous in silhouette, its face frozen in a sneer that had seen more sins than the pulpit below. When the wind rose just right, the thing seemed to whisper, not with a voice, but with a kind of terrible patience. Stone didn't speak, but it remembered, and tonight it had something to give up. Behind a loose chunk of masonry, where time had pried open the past like a wound, Father Brown found a rusted locket and a revolver. The revolver was the old kind, a snub-nosed .38, the nickel finish dulled by rain and remorse. One bullet had been fired. 5 remained, silent like teeth in a mouth too tired to speak. The locket was worse, small, delicate, engraved with a single word in Latin, misericordia, mercy, and yet the thing reeked of something far colder. Father Brown turned both objects in his hands with the reverence of a man handling relics, sacred or profane. It was often hard to tell. The locket opened easily. Inside was a photo, curled with age, of a girl no older than 16. Her smile was the kind that made promises it didn't know it would have to keep. She wore a crucifix and a sadness, both thin and easily overlooked. The revolver he placed carefully in his coat. The locket he held longer, as if waiting for it to whisper too. Downstairs, the church lay in silence thick as incense. The shadows clung to pews and confessionals like parishioners who refused to go home. Father Brown moved through the nave slowly, his footsteps small and certain. Something about the locket made the air feel heavier. It wasn't just the photo, it was what hadn't been said. The kind of silence that leaves bruises. Detective Mallory was already waiting when Father Brown entered his study. He didn't knock, he never did. His coat was wet, as usual, his face grim, like he was waiting for someone to disappoint him. He held up a small manila envelope. "Another body," he said, "near the old bell tower on 3rd. Same caliber as Hargrave. Shot through the chest. Execution style." Father Brown didn't flinch. "Name?" "Jules Morvin, fixer. Ran numbers for the Monteverde crowd back in the day. Slid off the radar a few years ago. You'd think he was clean if you didn't know better." "Few men vanish without first wanting to be found," Father Brown said. Mallory dropped the envelope on the desk. "And you found something, didn't you?" Father Brown showed him the revolver. "Missing 1 round." Mallory whistled low. "You think it's the murder weapon?" "I think it's a confession," Father Brown said. "And the locket?" Mallory opened it, raised his eyebrows. "Young girl. Pretty. You think she's the key?" "No," said Father Brown. "I think she's the lock." They traced the locket to a jeweler who remembered the commission. 16 years ago, the man said. Older gentleman. Bought it custom. Said it was for his daughter. Latin engraving. Real sentimental. "Name?" Mallory asked. The jeweler tapped his forehead. "Something French." "Duval?" "No, Duvaux. That's it." Edmond Duvaux. Father Brown closed his eyes. The name sat in the dark corners of memory like a forgotten prayer. Duveau had been a big man, in a small room, a lawyer for men who made money disappear and enemies dissolve. He'd retired a decade back, citing health. But the truth was, the streets had grown colder than he could manage, and the corpses were stacking higher than even his briefs could cover. They found Duveau in a retirement home, tucked between a funeral parlor and a liquor store. The place smelled of bleach and regret. He was frail now, bones beneath paper skin, but his eyes were sharp enough to cut glass. He looked at the photo and locket like a man, slapped by the past. "She was my daughter," he said quietly. "Anna. Dead now. Car crash. Or so the papers said." Father Brown heard the bitterness between the words. "And the truth?" Duveau sighed. "She fell in love with a boy. Morven. I warned her. She wouldn't listen. He had that charm, slick as oil and just as poisonous. When she got pregnant, he vanished. Hargrave paid for her to disappear, gave her a new name, a new town. But she never forgave me, said I sold her." For Silver Mallory leaned forward. "So you killed them?" Duveau laughed, and it was a terrible, hollow sound. "No, detective. I just buried her. She died 2 years after the baby. Never saw the child. Never spoke another kind word to me. No, killing them? That's someone else's confession." Father Brown watched the old man closely. "But you know whose." Duveau looked down. "I gave the locket to someone, years ago. Said it would mean something. Mercy, I thought. Fool that I was." They left, without further answers. Outside, the rain had started again, fine and needle-sharp. Mallory lit a cigarette with hands that shook more than they used to. "This is getting too personal," he muttered. "It's not about money or turf anymore." "No," said Father Brown. "It's about grief, and grief grows teeth." Back at the rectory, a letter was waiting, pinned to the church doors with a blade. It read, "You look for sinners where they kneel." But this one prayed with a bullet. Beneath it, a name. Lydia Vaughn. She was the woman from before, the lounge singer with eyes like dark water. She met them at a diner near the waterfront, dressed in mourning black, but with no intention of being pitied. She smoked like it gave her purpose. "You're digging up ghosts, Father," she said, "and some of them bite." "Did you know Anna Duveau?" Father Brown asked. "Yes, and no." She exhaled slowly. "She came to me once, needed help, a place to stay. I took her in. She was broken, not like the girls who get hit, broken like a mirror that still shows the whole room." "And Morven?" Mallory asked. Lydia's lip curled. "He came sniffing around, looking to apologize. Said he'd changed. Anna didn't believe him. I didn't either." "Who killed him?" Father Brown asked softly. She looked away. "Anna died 2 years later, alone. I buried her. I kept the locket. I gave it to her daughter. Thought it might anchor her to something. Maybe not mercy, but memory." "Her daughter?" Father Brown asked. Lydia looked up then. "Yes, she's alive." They found her working in a back room of a nightclub called the Gutter Line. A dancer, not the kind that moves to music, the kind that moves around shadows and avoids questions. Her name was Emily. She had her mother's smile and her father's silence. She recognized the locket, held it like a lifeline. "Do you know what it means?" Father Brown asked. She nodded. "She told me once, mercy, but not the kind you ask for, the kind you give." Mallory stepped forward. "Did you shoot Hargrave or Morven?" Emily didn't flinch. "They died the day she did. I just helped the calendar catch up." Father Brown sighed. "And the revolver?" I hid it. Didn't want to use it again. Father Brown nodded. Thank you for not becoming them. Mallory looked at him, half protesting. You're just going to let her go? She's already sentenced herself, Father Brown said. She'll carry that locket longer than any prison term. The detective muttered curses under his breath, but said no more. Emily walked away, disappearing into the city like all ghosts do, without apology. Later, as the bells of St. Dominic's rang across the rooftops, Father Brown returned to the gargoyle. The wind blew again, soft and terrible. The whisper returned. This time, it said nothing, just listened. Father Brown folded his hands and prayed, not for justice, which had already come, but for mercy, for a city that had forgotten how to ask for it, and a girl who had tried to give it too late. Chapter 4. The clock struck sinister. Midnight at Hargrave House. The rain had begun again, soft at first, then bitter, slicing through the air like it meant to wash something clean, and couldn't. The streets around the old manor on Belgrave Hill were deserted, the gas lamps outside guttering in the wind, their glow trembling like a drunk's last prayer. Inside, the old grandfather clock struck 13. Not once, not as a quirk of machinery or a trick of time. 13. One chime too many for any sane hour. And then, silence. The maid who heard it, Nina, a girl too thin for the cold and too honest for the house, swore she also heard weeping in the walls, not moaning, not wailing, just the low, defeated sobbing of a man who knew what he'd done and couldn't face it anymore. She ran, of course. All good instincts said to run from things that cry without a throat. But she didn't go far. Instead, she knocked on the door of the only man in the city who didn't carry a gun and still scared the devil himself. Father Brown arrived at the house, wrapped in fog and soaked to the bones. He didn't carry much, just a small umbrella, a crucifix, and that way of speaking that made you feel like he'd known you since birth. The door opened before he knocked, always did, when guilt was waiting. The house had the kind of silence you could drown in. Old portraits watched from the walls with eyes that remembered crimes long since dust. The maid led him to the drawing room where the grandfather clock stood tall and arrogant, ticking slow and low like a man biding his time. She's not crazy, the butler muttered. That clock did strike 13. I was in the kitchen, heard it clear. Father Brown said nothing. He simply moved to the clock, running a hand along the wood that had aged badly, like too many lies pressed into its grain. He listened to the tick, not just for the rhythm, but for the hesitation, that small, almost imperceptible pause between seconds, like a stammer. He reached around the back and found it, a seam where there shouldn't be one, a small depression in the carvings, almost like a tear. He pressed it. The compartment opened with a sigh. Inside were letters, yellowed, curled, tied with ribbon, the color of old bruises. He pulled them out carefully, one by one. No signatures, but all written in the same delicate hand, ink faded and desperate. Letters filled with confessions, threats, declarations of love twisted into bitterness. One line repeated across several. The priest knows what you did. Father Brown read them with the slow patience of a man decoding a prayer in a language he once spoke fluently. He tucked them into his coat, turned to the maid. You are right to be afraid, he said, but not of ghosts. The next morning, Hargrave House was buzzing with men who didn't wear collars. Detective Mallory and his crew, all grey coats and cigarette smoke, filling the air with the stink of the real world. Mallory looked at Father Brown, like he always did. Like the priest was the fire, and he was the fool holding matches. So, what do the letters tell you, Father? That someone died, Father Brown said, but not recently, and someone else is only just starting to mourn. They mention a name? No, Father Brown replied, but they mention shame, and that's harder to fake. Mallory lit a cigarette with a flick that had seen better days. You think it's connected to the Hargrave shooting? I think Simon Hargrave built this house out of secrets, Father Brown said, and now it's collapsing. Mallory grunted. You ever think of getting a license? You'd make a damn good detective. Father Brown smiled almost sadly. I already serve the only judge that matters. Later that day, he paid a visit to Lydia Vaughn. She was back at the Velvet Mercy, lips redder than law and voice smoother than any alibi. She didn't smile when he walked in. She only poured a drink and handed it to him like it was poison he'd already agreed to drink. You're here about the letters, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes. She sat, legs crossed, cigarette burning between two fingers like a slow fuse. You think I wrote them? No, he said. You're too honest. She laughed bitterly. That's a first. They're from someone close to Simon, he said. Someone he loved, or feared, or both. She leaned back, eyes distant. Her name was Marie Danvers. She was his first mistake, and his last. Marie's dead, Father Brown said. Maybe, Lydia said. But she wrote like a woman trying to live forever. Marie Danvers. The name fluttered through the city like an old sin. She'd vanished years ago. No body, no note, no fuss. The official word was that she'd moved abroad. But the unofficial word, the one whispered in rooms that locked from the inside, was that she'd been buried in the kind of way that left nothing for God to recognize. Father Brown visited Marie's sister, an aging seamstress with fingers stained by dye and sorrow. She wept when he said the name, not because she missed her, but because she'd already mourned too long to start again. She loved him, she said. Even when he hit her, even when he lied, she still thought he'd change. Did she tell you she was writing to him? She nodded. Every week. Letters he never answered. But she wrote anyway, said it was the only way to keep herself sane. Do you believe she's dead? No, she said. I believe he made her disappear. Back at St. Dominic's, Father Brown laid the letters across the altar like relics. He read them all again, this time not as messages, but as riddles. And there it was, tucked in a sentence like an afterthought. You said I belonged in the walls, so that's where I'll stay. He returned to Hargrave House that night, alone. The storm had returned, full of thunder and judgment. The clock struck midnight, and then 13. Again. Father Brown moved to the wall behind the clock. He knocked, once, twice. On the third, it echoed hollow. Not plaster, wood, a false panel. He pried it loose. The smell hit first, dust and rot, and something older. Inside, curled like a child who never got to grow up, was a skeleton. The hair was still faintly red. The dress, once white, now the color of betrayal. In her hand, bones wrapped around a dried flower, was the last letter. This one signed. Forgive me, Father, for loving a man who thought silence was stronger than justice. Forgive me for staying. Forgive me for dying. Mallory was called. Photos were taken. Statements recorded. But the mystery, as far as the law was concerned, was solved. Simon Hargrave had killed Marie Danvers, sealed her in the wall, kept her letters as trophies, and someone, maybe a servant, maybe a remorseful lover, had found out. The gunshot in the confessional wasn't vengeance. It was penance. But Father Brown knew better. 3 nights later, he confronted Lydia in the sacristy. You were the one who knew, who heard the clock strike wrong, who wept when you read her words. She didn't deny it. You couldn't kill him, he said gently, but you made sure he was judged. She looked at the crucifix. He made her vanish. I made sure she was found. That's justice. No, said Father Brown. That's closure. Justice would have been mercy, but mercy died with her. Lydia lit a cigarette. Her hands shook. Will God forgive me? Father Brown took the matchbook from her, held her hands still. Only if you stop hiding behind sins that aren't yours. Outside, the clock struck 12. Only 12. This time, there was no 13. Chapter 5. Shadows on Cobblestone. A second body surfaced, this time a barmaid named Elsie Dorr, found in a back alley behind the Black Ribbon Tavern, her eyes wide with terror, her rosary clutched tight. The cobblestones beneath her were slick with rain, and something darker, the crimson trail ending where her knees had finally given out. The rosary beads wound around her fingers like a lifeline that failed to hold. She had worked behind that bar for 5 years, pouring rotgut for men who forgot their own names by midnight. She wasn't anyone important to the city, not to the crooked men in coats, or the girls who danced upstairs for dollars, but she mattered now because someone had gone through the trouble of making her into a message. Father Brown walked the alleys like a ghost, eyes downcast, lips tight in something more profound than thought. He didn't flinch when he passed the bloodstain. He didn't stop when the drunk in the doorway muttered about shadows moving wrong. Mind stayed on the killer, not the hand that held the blade, but the heart behind it, the heart that left a rosary. There was no shortage of suspects. The Black Ribbon was a magnet for men with secrets and women with scars. It was the kind of place where the jukebox played just loud enough to drown out what people didn't want to hear. Behind the bar, the new girl was pouring drinks with trembling hands. Her name was Della, and she didn't look like she'd slept in 2 nights. When Father Brown slid onto a stool, she gave him the same tired nod she gave every customer. But her eyes lingered, just a second too long. You're the priest, she said. I am. She said you came in sometimes, for ginger ale. I prefer it flat, Father Brown said quietly. She laughed, but it was a sound borrowed from some better time. Elsie said you listened more than you spoke. That's how God hears the prayers people don't say. Della looked down, drying a glass that didn't need it. She was scared, kept checking the alley, jumping at noises, said someone from her past was sniffing around. Did she say who? No. Della bit her lip. But she said he had eyes like rust, and a voice like he used to sing lullabies, but forgot the words. Father Brown tucked that away. He'd heard descriptions like that before, not in confessions, but in nightmares. He thanked her and stepped back into the rain. Detective Mallory was already there, crouched by the body, coat soaked, cigarette burning like defiance. In the dark, he looked up as Father Brown approached, eyes narrowed under his brim. Second one in 2 weeks, he grunted. First Hargrave, now her. I'm starting to think someone's working through a list. Or a conscience, Father Brown murmured. Mallory raised a brow. You think this is about guilt. I think guilt is just revenge we aim at ourselves, Father Brown said. And sometimes we miss. The coroner came and went, but the rosary stayed with Father Brown. It wasn't from any church. He new, but the crucifix was worn smooth, handled often, desperately. He traced it once, then slipped it into his coat. The dead didn't need symbols anymore, but the living did. The next day brought a visit from a woman named Cassandra Hale. She swept into St. Dominic's like a shadow with red lipstick, the kind of dame who turned heads just to twist them the other way. She wore a hat with a veil and gloves that hadn't seen dirt, but her eyes told a different story. She sat in the confessional, not for confession, but for performance. "I knew Elsie," she said. "We weren't friends, but we had similar problems." "Men?" Father Brown asked. "Ghosts," she replied. "The kind that walk around with guns and smiles." "And what do you want from me?" She hesitated. "I want to stay ahead of the killer, and I think you're the only one who can do that without ending up dead." Father Brown let the silence stretch. "You're not here out of fear. You're here to find out if your name's in that killer's prayers." She stiffened. "You think I'm next?" "I think you deserve to be." Her lips parted, but no words came. When she left, she dropped something, a handkerchief, embroidered with the initials MD, not hers, and not forgotten. That night, Father Brown returned to the Black Ribbon. He took a seat in the back, watching the door, watching the stage. A man took the piano, fingers heavy, notes wrong. A singer followed, a woman in red, voice like gravel and smoke. But the crowd didn't notice the man in the corner, coat too clean, hands too still. Father Brown did. After the set, the man went out the back. Father Brown followed. In the alley, they met. "You've been asking questions," the man said, "and you've been answering them with bullets." The man smiled, not kindly. "You're not the law." "No," Father Brown said. "I'm the man who knows what law forgets. That sin stains deeper than blood." The man's smile faded. "She ruined me." "They all did." "She lied, said it was mine, said she loved me." "She probably did. That's what made it hurt." The man raised a hand, but not for a weapon, for a memory. "I left. I ran. And when I came back, they laughed." "So you made them stop laughing?" "I made them remember." Father Brown stepped forward. "You left the rosary because you wanted them to be saved, but you only damned yourself." The man stared at him, and for the first time looked afraid. "I wanted peace." "You wanted punishment," Father Brown said. "You just weren't sure if you deserved it." A shout. "Mallory from the street." The man ran. They caught him 2 blocks over. His name was Marcus Dorr, Elsie's brother. Gone 10 years, dishonorably discharged. Came home to find his sister in the same bar their mother used to clean. The twist wasn't in his identity. It was in the reason. He hadn't come for revenge. He'd come to die. The first murder was self-defense. Hargrave had pulled a gun. The second was guilt. He didn't mean to kill Elsie. He meant to scare her. But she ran, slipped, cracked her head on the stones. He found her with the rosary in her hand, put it in hers again. Then he ran, like before. In the end, Father Brown sat with him in the cell. "Do you think God will forgive me?" Marcus asked. "Only if you forgive yourself." Marcus stared at the wall. "That's the harder part." Father Brown stood. "That's why I'm still here." Outside, the city coughed up more rain, and the alleys whispered again, not with secrets, with prayers. Chapter 6. The Chapel Without a Cross. Down by the docks, where the sea air carried the sour smell of rust and ruin, stood a ruined chapel, half collapsed and forgotten, like a sin the city had tried to bury but couldn't quite let go of. The crucifix was gone, torn from its place, leaving behind a jagged scar in the wall like a wound that never healed. Only the altar remained, dust-covered and cracked, but strangely untouched by time. Someone had lit candles on it. They flickered in the wind, leaking through broken stained glass, dancing shadows across the crumbling pews and stone floor. It wasn't a place for prayer anymore. It was a place where ghosts came to speak, or to listen. Father Brown stepped into the gloom, his small frame casting a long shadow behind him. He didn't look like much in the half-light, just an aging priest with a scuffed cassock and eyes that looked too kind for the world they saw. But even the broken chapel paused to notice him. He didn't carry a weapon. He didn't need one. There were men in this city who'd killed without blinking and still crossed themselves when he walked past. He wasn't alone. A child sat in the front pew, legs swinging, coat too big for his small shoulders. He was thin, the way hunger makes a boy stretch into shadow, and his voice was hoarse when he spoke. She comes at night, the lady in grey. She cries and asks the same thing. What does she ask? Father Brown's tone was gentle, as if they were discussing the weather. The boy didn't turn to look at him. She says, "Have you seen my child?" Then she cries, real quiet, like she's trying not to wake anyone. Father Brown looked toward the altar, toward the flames. "And have you seen her child?" "No," the boy whispered, "but I think he's dead." It was 3 nights ago when the body was found. A baby, wrapped in a tattered blanket, cradled inside a crate between rusted barrels near the dockside warehouse. No note, no name, just silence. The coroner guessed the infant had been no more than a few weeks old, smothered, left there like refuse. The papers had one day's sympathy for the unnamed dead, then moved on. But the streets didn't forget that fast, and neither did the chapel. The boy's name was Tommy, a runaway, maybe orphaned, maybe just abandoned by the kind of parents who leave bruises in place of lullabies. He slept in the chapel sometimes, said it felt safer than the shelters, where men came at night with heavy hands and heavier breath. Father Brown gave him a sandwich and a small crucifix. "For company," he said. Tommy took it like a man being handed a sword. Father Brown returned the next morning, and the candles were still burning. Someone had kept vigil. He found new footprints in the dust, small, barefoot, feminine, and he found something else on the altar, a torn corner of a photograph, a woman's mouth, frozen in a crooked smile, lipstick smudged, the edge of a pearl earring. The rest had been ripped away. He took it to Mallory. The detective was knee-deep in liquor and cynicism at that hour, sipping whiskey in his office while the fog clung to the window like regret. "This city's full of women who lose children," Mallory said, studying the photograph. "Most don't end up lighting candles in a graveyard for buildings." "Most don't come to a chapel without a cross," Father Brown replied. "Someone is mourning, and someone else is hiding." Mallory gave him that look he always did, the one that mixed respect with annoyance. "You think this has something to do with the baby?" "I think someone's trying to confess, but they've forgotten how." The lady in grey was first seen by a dock worker named Brill. He was the sort of man who could break a jaw with a glance, but wouldn't talk to police without a bribe. Father Brown found him drinking by the tracks. "She's not a ghost," Brill said. "She's real. Came out of the mist like she belonged in it. Eyes like she'd cried for 1,000 years. Asked me if I'd seen her son. I told her to get lost. She just looked at me like I was already dead." "Where did she go?" "Back into the fog." Father Brown walked the docks that night, alone, He passed crates full of nothing, doors chained shut, rats that didn't bother hiding, and then he saw her, standing beneath the old gaslight, coat grey, hair darker, her silhouette blurred like memory. She didn't run, she didn't speak. She just stared at him, and her eyes were oceans of sorrow. "You're looking for someone," Father Brown said, her lips parted. "My child." "Gone," she nodded. "Taken." "By whom?" She closed her eyes. "I made a mistake." Father Brown stepped closer. "Then make it again, out loud this time." But she was already gone, slipped into the dark like a page torn from a book. The next day, a name surfaced. Iris Devane, singer once, beautiful in the way neon signs are, bright, dangerous, and always flickering. Vanished from the clubs a year ago. Rumors said she got pregnant by a man who wore silk suits and diamond rings. Rumors also said the man vanished too, only not by choice. Father Brown found Iris in a flophouse near the tracks. She opened the door with eyes hollowed out by grief and gin. The room stank of mold and perfume. There were pictures on the wall, torn, taped, faces scribbled out. She didn't bother pretending. "I know why you're here," she said. "Do you? You want to know if I'm the lady in grey." "I already know you are." She laughed, but it cracked midway. "Then you know I lost him." "Did you lose him?" Father Brown said softly. "Or leave him?" She didn't answer, just sat on the bed and stared at her hands. "I didn't kill him," she whispered, "but I let him die." "Why?" "Because I thought someone else would care. The father said he'd take care of it. I thought he meant properly." "Who was he?" She didn't speak, but she reached under the mattress and pulled out a wallet. Inside was a business card. Victor Moraine. Solutions. Discreet. Victor Moraine was a fixer for the kinds of people who paid to keep their names out of papers. He didn't smile, because smiling was for men who slept well. Father Brown found him in the back room of a pool hall, surrounded by smoke and sharks. "Can't help you, priest," he said. "I don't do charity." "I'm not asking for charity," Father Brown replied. "I'm offering absolution." Moraine raised an eyebrow. "I didn't kill the kid." "No," said Father Brown, "but you passed the job to someone who might have." Moraine's jaw tightened. "I passed it to a nurse. Paid her good money, told her to find a family. I didn't check twice." "And now?" "Now the nurse is gone. Dead. Fell in the river. Nobody saw." Father Brown stood. "Someone did. God, and maybe the boy's mother." He left without waiting. He didn't need Moraine's guilt. It was already written across his face. Later that night, he returned to the chapel. The candles were lit again, and Tommy was gone. In his place, a note. "She found me. She's not angry. She just wants me to come with her." I said I'd wait. "Tell Father Brown I was never really scared, just sad." Father Brown read it 3 times. Then he stepped outside and followed the footprints in the dust. He found them on the pier. The lady in grey and the boy, holding hands, looking out at the sea. "She's not really my mother," Tommy said, "but I think she wanted to be." Father Brown nodded. "Sometimes that's enough." She turned to him, eyes filled with light this time. "I wanted to save him, and I couldn't, so I tried, again." "You did," Father Brown said. She kissed Tommy's forehead, then vanished. No wind, no sound, just gone. Tommy looked up. "Is she gone forever?" "No," Father Brown said. "Just home." The next morning, the cross was found on the chapel floor, unbroken, restored, and the candles burned a little brighter. Chapter 7. a pocketful of lies. Mallory arrested the kid on a Thursday morning, right after the rain stopped, and the gutters still stank of cheap whiskey, old cigarettes, and things too rotten to name. The boy was scrawny, no more than 19 if that, and carried the wiry look of someone who knew how to run faster than guilt. They dragged him out of a flophouse 3 blocks from Greyburn Street, where Hargrave had been shot, and found the banker's gold pocket watch in his coat, still ticking, still smug in its little cage of brass and vanity. It was the same watch Hargrave had worn every day of his life, the one he used to check while smirking at lesser men. Mallory, never the patient sort, clapped irons on the kid and hauled him into the station, like a fisherman landing a trophy. The city breathed a little easier. Papers ran the headline, "Hargrave killer nabbed, street rat caught, with victim's timepiece." But Father Brown stood just outside the interrogation room and knew, immediately, it was all wrong. The boy didn't have the look of a man who'd killed for something as precious as time. He had the look of a man trying to forget it. Inside, the boy's name was Cyril Knox. He had a busted lip, a crooked smile, and more silence than answers. Mallory paced in circles, like a dog trying to dig a hole in concrete. "You're caught red-handed," he barked, "so unless you've got the Archangel Michael vouching for you, I'd start talking." Cyril just stared. Father Brown sat beside him. "Did you steal the watch?" "Yes," the boy said, eyes flat. "From the body?" He hesitated. "Number?" "From a man in a grey suit who was asleep on a bench behind the Velvet Mercy. Slipped it out of his coat. Didn't know it belonged to a corpse." Mallory scoffed. A likely story. But Father Brown held the watch in his hand. It was ticking. Sure, but wrong. 17 minutes ahead. Not 10. Not 15. 17. A number too odd to be accidental. He opened the back. There were fresh scratches near the gear. Tampered with. Not by a pickpocket, but by someone who knew that truth hangs on the minute hand like a man on a gallows. "Why 17 minutes?" Father Brown murmured. Mallory rolled his eyes. "He probably dropped it, or it's a cheap fake." But Father Brown knew better. Hargrave was many things, but careless wasn't one of them. That watch was never off. Until now. And now it told a lie, one precise enough to rewrite the hour Hargrave had died. "Let the boy go," Father Brown said. Mallory leaned in, voice low. "You're vouching for a thief. I'm vouching against a murderer." Cyril was cut loose, back to the shadows where boys like him lived. But Father Brown kept the watch, slipping it into his coat like a secret no one wanted, but everyone feared. He stepped into the street, where the wet bricks still reflected old sins. The truth, he knew, wasn't buried in the boy's coat. It was in the lie someone had gone to great trouble to protect. He walked through the city like a priest among ghosts. Past taverns where the neon buzzed like flies, past alleyways that whispered names in the dark. He thought of Hargrave's last hours, of who had something to lose if time told the truth, and he thought of Lydia Varn. She greeted him, at the Velvet Mercy, with her usual poise, 1 part ice, 1 part fire, wrapped in perfume and red silk. Her voice was velvet too, but it trembled around the edges. "Back for another sermon, Father?" "Only the Gospel of Minutes." She tilted her head. "That's a curious kind of scripture." He handed her the watch. "You've seen this before." She turned it over in her hand. Hargrave never let it out of his sight. Said it was his conscience. Which is funny, since I never saw him check it before lying. "Someone changed the time," Why? To break an alibi. She stiffened, just slightly. Whose? That's the question, he said. Who needed 17 minutes of distance from a corpse? She didn't answer, but she didn't deny it, either, which was answer enough. Father Brown walked her silence out the door and down the street to the offices of Winston Bray, a lawyer with a talent for removing blood from contracts and memory from the law. Bray had represented Hargrave more than once. He also happened to be the last man to see him alive, by appointment no less. At 9 o'clock, according to every record, receipt, and secretary's polished recollection. But what if it was actually 9:17? Bray welcomed Father Brown with forced warmth, the kind that creaked under the weight of scrutiny. I assume this isn't a social call, Bray said. No, Father Brown replied. I wanted to ask what you and Hargrave discussed the night he died. Bray leaned back. Client privilege, Father. Surely you understand. And if the client is dead, that only makes it stronger. But if you lied about the time he left your office, it makes it criminal. Bray's smile thinned. You're suggesting I had something to do with his death? No, said Father Brown. I'm suggesting you knew who did. Bray stood. I think we're done. But Father Brown stayed seated. You adjusted the watch, or had someone do it. Moved it forward 17 minutes. Enough to place Hargrave's time of death earlier. Enough to clear your name, but not enough to fool God. Bray didn't reply. His hands were still, his breath shallow. You're protecting someone, Father Brown said. Someone close. But the truth is, it only damns you both. That night, Bray was found. In his office, shot once through the heart. A suicide note beside him. The ink hadn't dried. Father Brown was the first to arrive. Having already guessed he might be too late. The note was short. I couldn't let her fall for my sins. The police found nothing else. Just guilt, heavy and final. Father Brown attended the funeral in silence. Lydia Vaughn wore black and no veil. Her eyes met his only once. He loved me, she said after. I never asked him to. You didn't need to, Father Brown said. That's how love works. It volunteers. He changed the time for me. Yes. He died for it. No, Father Brown said gently. He died because he couldn't carry the lie any longer. She nodded, eyes glassy. So what happens now? Father Brown looked at the sky. It was raining again, soft and insistent. You live. That's the penance. She didn't argue, just turned and walked into the mist. The boy, Cyril, was never seen again. Maybe he ran. Maybe he finally found a place where time didn't lie. Father Brown still carried the watch, 17 minutes ahead. A reminder that sometimes the truth is just a breath behind, waiting to be heard. Chapter 8. The Woman in the Veil. She appeared at evening mass, draped in black, her veil so thick it caught the candlelight like cobwebs trembling in a draught. She came in after the readings had started and sat alone, 3 pews from the altar, motionless save for her gloved hands which clutched a missal as if it were a lifeline. The rain outside tapped the stained glass windows, slow and patient, as if the city itself were listening. Father Brown, in his worn cassock and with his small hands folded, watched her the way he watched everything, with quiet attention, not suspicion. It was not unusual for grief to wear a veil, but there was something in the way she moved, something that suggested not mourning, but hiding. She didn't kneel during the prayers. She didn't take the host. She waited, and when the chapel had emptied, she rose and walked to the side chapel where the candles were kept burning, always. She didn't light one. She only whispered, "He was my husband, but not my only sin." Then she placed a small prayer card on the marble ledge, turned, and vanished through the rear exit. By the time Father Brown reached the door, the night had already swallowed her. Only the faintest trace of lavender perfume hung in the air, ghostly and persistent. The prayer card was old, creased and blood-stained. Not fresh, not wet, but the mark was there, a brownish blotch across the face of St. Dismas, the good thief. On the back, in a hand sharp and deliberate, was written, "Forgive him. He paid my debt." Father Brown studied the card in the lamplight of his study. He didn't need the city records to know who the man had been. Simon Hargrave's sins were still echoing down the alleys and through the whiskey-glass windows of the Black Ribbon. But there was another name he hadn't heard in years. Jonathan Vale, a judge who had disappeared 2 winters ago, presumed dead, car found near the river, door open, coat still on the seat. No body, just silence, and a widow who had vanished just as quietly. The woman in the veil hadn't said his name. She didn't have to. Some confessions wear no labels, but they are heard all the same. The next morning, Father Brown walked the rain-slicked streets of Greyburn, where the gutter water ran like old blood and the buildings leaned in like eavesdroppers. He passed the pawn shop where Hargrave's watch had first been clocked, nodded at the newsboy who never met a headline he couldn't whisper like gossip, and made his way to the courthouse. It was a hollow shell now, abandoned since a fire scorched the east wing and scattered the records like ash. But he wasn't there for justice in the official sense. He was there for the ghosts, and one of them wore pearls. Detective Mallory was waiting outside his office when Father Brown returned. He looked as though he'd aged 2 years since the last murder. His coat sagged with damp, and his eyes were red-rimmed and impatient. "Someone turned up a body," he said. "Back room of an old dry goods store on Armsworth. Female, no ID, burned fingertips, no teeth." Father Brown looked at him. "And you think it's the woman from the church?" "I think it's too convenient not to be," Mallory said. "What I don't get is why she came to you first." "She didn't," Father Brown said. "She came to God. I was just in the room. The body was gone before they arrived. The coroner's van had been hijacked en route. 2 men, masks, quick. No blood, no fuss." Mallory cursed, and Father Brown simply closed his eyes. "You see," he said softly, "even the dead are afraid of being found." That night, Father Brown returned to the chapel. The candles were still burning. In their flicker, he noticed the envelope tucked beneath the statue of the Virgin. Inside, a photograph, torn from a larger print. The woman in the veil, unveiled, smiling. Beside her, Jonathan Vale, and behind them, barely in frame, Simon Hargrave, watching like a shadow that hadn't yet realized it was unwanted. There was no note, but there didn't need to be. A story had begun to take shape. A marriage, a betrayal, and a favor that became a debt. He brought the photo to Lydia Vaughn. She met him in the back room of the Velvet Mercy, her dress black now, by habit, more than grief. "She's back," Father Brown said. "Is she?" Lydia poured herself something golden. "Or is it just the guilt?" "She said Hargrave was her husband." Lydia's eyes narrowed. "Then she's lying." "He officiated the ceremony by proxy. It's legal in Nevada, but not holy." Lydia laughed bitterly. Nothing Hargrave touched was holy. She also said he wasn't her only sin. Lydia's hand trembled. What did she mean? She meant Jonathan Vale. For a moment the air seemed to thicken. Lydia sat down, the glass forgotten. She loved him, she said, and he loved her. But Hargrave, he owned people, paperwork, threats, favors. Vale was going to take him down. Grand jury, sealed files. Then he vanished. Hargrave made him disappear. No, Lydia whispered. She did, to protect him, or so she thought. Father Brown nodded. She killed him? No, Lydia said. But she made the call that put him in the car, and she wasn't the one who met him at the river. And who did? I did, Lydia said. I begged him to stop. I told him she wasn't worth it. He didn't listen. So I watched. And I ran. And I've been running ever since. Father Brown leaned forward. And now? I'm tired, Father. She left me this, he said, handing her the prayer card. Lydia read it. Then, she's ready to stop running too. They found her that night. Not dead, but close. Hiding in an abandoned flat above the dry goods store, the same place the body was taken from. She'd faked her death, using the corpse of a missing girl. Burned the fingers, removed the teeth. A trick she'd learned from Hargrave. When they brought her in, she didn't speak to anyone but Father Brown. I was scared, she said. I thought if I left again, they'd stop digging. But I was wrong. Every lie I told just made the hole deeper. And what about Jonathan? Father Brown asked. She wept, quietly, without theatrics. He forgave me, she said, in a letter I never deserved. Father Brown looked at her for a long time. And what will you do now? I'll tell the truth, she said, even if it kills me. He nodded. Then perhaps this time it will save you. Mallory closed the file weeks later. Vale's death was ruled accidental. Hargrave's still an open case. But Father Brown didn't care for the paperwork. He walked the chapel aisles, lighting candles one by one, and when he reached the side altar, he placed the blood-stained card beside the statue of the penitent thief. He stood a while in silence, listening not to the echo of footsteps, but to the stillness that follows when a soul finally stops lying to itself. And somewhere outside, in the alley behind the chapel, the rain began to fall again, not heavy, not punishing, just enough to wash the streets clean for a while. Chapter 9, Blood on the Missal. Someone broke into the rectory, not to steal, but to leave something. A single page torn from a Latin missal, soaked in blood, folded neatly on Father Brown's desk. No fingerprints, no mess, just a quiet violation of a place meant for peace. The page lay like a wound beneath the flickering lamp, and Father Brown, small and calm, in the way of ancient stones and tired saints, read the handwritten lines scrawled in red. Woe unto them that call evil good, and good evil. Isaiah, sharp as a knife in the wrong hands. It wasn't just scripture, it was judgment. Not God's, someone else's, and someone meant it personally. Father Brown didn't alert the police. Not yet. Mallory would come when the blood dried into something reportable, something official. But this wasn't a crime scene. It was a warning. And Father Brown had learned long ago that threats dressed in scripture were not always meant to kill. They were meant to cleanse. This wasn't about money, not lust, not revenge in the crude, fast sense. This was retribution in its Sunday best. Outside, the rain came in crooked lines, the kind of rain that didn't wash anything away, but only smeared the dirt deeper. Greyburn was always wet this time of year, always hunched like a sinner in the pews. Father Brown walked beneath the halo of flickering street lamps, not hurrying. He didn't need to. Retribution had a rhythm, and he knew how to follow it. He stopped at the Velvet Mercy, not for the drinks or the noise, but because truth often sat at the back table with cheap gin and smeared lipstick. Lydia Vaughn saw him coming and didn't blink. She was back in her red, back in control, but her voice held the same hollow as the chapel's broken bell. "You look like you've seen a ghost, Father." "I think one may have visited," he said. She lit a cigarette with a hand too still to be at ease. "What kind of ghost?" "The kind that quotes scripture and bleeds on sacred books." She exhaled. "You always did attract the right kind of crazy." Father Brown sat across from her. "Who hates me, Lydia?" She smiled, but her eyes didn't. "That's a long list. You've walked through a dozen sins in the past month. Some people would rather their guilt stay buried." "This isn't guilt," Father Brown said. "It's absolution. The violent kind." She looked away, to the bar, where men leaned too close to women who leaned further away. "You're chasing something you don't want to catch." He left her there, a prayer, half answered, and moved on through the city. He walked until the buildings stopped trying to impress and just leaned against each other for warmth. It was there, in the warehouse ruins by the water, that he found the second message. It was nailed to a wooden beam, behind the remnants of a confessional booth, stolen from a church, long burned. Another missal page, this one blackened at the corners, the verse still visible. "They have chosen their own ways, and their soul delighteth in their abominations." He didn't need to read it twice. This was a sermon, laid brick by brick in blood and fire, and someone wanted him to see the whole homily. The next morning, Mallory was waiting on the church steps, trench coat soaked and eyes narrowed. "You want to tell me why you didn't call?" Father Brown handed him the first missal page. "Because the message wasn't for you." Mallory scowled. "You get threats often?" "Only from the righteous." "You think it's connected to Hargrave?" "Everything is connected to Hargrave. He was a center of gravity. But this is about something older, something deeper." Mallory grunted. "You and your metaphors. Just tell me who wants you dead." "Someone who wants to be clean." Later, in the archives below St. Dominic's, Father Brown pulled out the old records, the ledgers of absolution, the confessions never named but always remembered. He wasn't looking for a name. He was looking for a pattern. And he found it. 3 years ago, a man named Ellis Vane had confessed, not to a priest, but to a lay brother. He was a small-time enforcer, the kind that broke fingers for unpaid debts, but he wept like a child and begged for forgiveness after leaving a woman named Maria Devine in a back alley, dead from a blow that hadn't meant to kill. He'd been drunk, she'd been desperate, and Hargrave had paid to make the story vanish. That confession never made it to court, but it had made it to the Book of Mercy. And now it was being rewritten. Father Brown visited the jail. Ellis Vane was still there, serving 5 years for a separate assault. But when he saw Father Brown, he flinched. "I didn't write anything," Vane said. "I swear. But someone knows your story." "I only ever told one man, Hargrave. He promised to keep it quiet." "Did he?" Vane looked at the floor. "Number he told me he'd write it down. Said he kept a record of debts." Father Brown nodded. "Hargrave's ledger. The real one. The book that wasn't kept in banks or courts." That night, Father Brown returned to the rectory. The third page was waiting on the chapel door, taped carefully. The verse, this time, "The blood of the innocent shall not cry in vain." He didn't read it as a threat anymore. It was a declaration. Someone was taking up judgment, not by law, by scripture. There were only a few who had access to Hargrave's real records. Fewer still who would know what to do with them, and fewer still who would think God had appointed them as executioner. Father Brown remembered. A man, Elias Merton, once a seminarian, left before vows. Brilliant, cold, obsessed with divine justice. They'd argued once over mercy. Merton had called it the final excuse of the damned. He lived now in a tenement by the tracks, worked as a clerk. No one noticed him. Father Brown found him in a room that smelled of mold and ink. The walls were lined with old Bibles, Latin texts, and files. So many files. "You came," Merton said, without looking up. "You've been leaving me messages, Father," Brown replied. "I thought you'd appreciate the poetry." "I appreciate the danger." Merton stood. He looked older than he should, like scripture had aged him from the inside. "Do you know what it's like," he said, "to watch evil walk free while the innocent rot?" "I know what it's like to forgive." Merton scoffed. "Forgiveness is weakness. You let them fester, Father. Hargrave, Vale, the woman in the veil, they all bled the city dry, and you lit candles for them. I listened. You absolved. I offered the truth." Merton stepped closer. "They didn't deserve peace." "Neither do you," Father Brown said. "But here I am." They stood in silence, broken only by the hum of the train outside. Merton sat again. "It's not over." "It can be," Father Brown said. "You wanted judgment. You've passed it. Now take the sentence." Merton looked at him. "I'm not afraid of prison." "I know," Father Brown said, "but you should be afraid of what comes after." Merton was arrested the next day. Mallory asked, no questions, just another madman with a Bible and a vendetta. The papers didn't even run the story. But Father Brown knew better. Sin, when dressed in scripture, was still sin. And vengeance, even when passed through a holy filter, still rotted the soul. That night, he burned the missal pages, one by one. And in the chapel, he lit a candle, for the lost, for the angry, and for the ones who thought God needed their help. Chapter 10. The Silence of Number 9. In a run-down boarding house on Crossmoor Lane, room number 9 had been rented for weeks. Paid in cash, no name, no sound, no footsteps on the creaking floorboards. Just a room that looked full only when it was empty. The landlady said she never saw the tenant, just the money left in a plain envelope every Sunday morning, slipped through the slot in her door before the sun had the decency to rise. And yet the bed was untouched, the water never run, and the mirror, oh the mirror, was smeared with a message written in thick red lipstick. He lied to save his soul. That, and an old crucifix left on the floor beneath it, cracked clean through the middle, as though someone had snapped their faith in half and left the evidence behind. Father Brown stood in that quiet, lifeless room and took in the scene the way a surgeon studies a scar, knowing what had healed, what hadn't, and what was still festering under the skin. The crucifix was old, not decorative, but personal. You didn't carry something like that unless it meant something. The lipstick, on the other hand, was cheap, the sort sold at corner stores and worn too often by women who got paid to smile at men who never deserved it. The words weren't a confession. They were a sentence, and they weren't meant for just anyone. They were meant for him. He'd followed the trail here, each step darker than the last. From the woman in the veil to the blood on the missal, from the child in the chapel to the broken watch and the corpse in the confessional. One by one, the pieces had slid into place like a rosary's beads between prayer-stained fingers. But something, no, someone, was missing. A figure whose shadow lingered on every page, in every whispered name, but who had never once stood in the light. Not a criminal, not a victim, not a mourner. Someone different. Someone who had written this story without ever signing their name. Father Brown picked up the crucifix and held it in his palm. It was light, brittle, the break clean and deliberate, not accidental, not angry, purposeful. It was a symbol, not of lost faith, but of judgment past. There had been grace once. Now, only silence. He turned toward the mirror again. The message glared back, cracked slightly where the glass had fractured down one corner, like a tear. He ran a finger across the writing. The color had dried to a dark maroon. Not fresh, days old, maybe more. He tilted his head and looked at the reflection. Not at himself, but the room behind him. Plain bed, small dresser, closet ajar, no window in view, but something moved, a shift in the air. And then from behind the door, a voice. "You shouldn't have come alone, Father." It was soft, almost a whisper, but not weak. It came from the shadows like something that had always been there, waiting for the one man foolish enough to come unarmed. Father Brown didn't turn around immediately. He closed his eyes for a breath, then spoke. "You've been following me. I've been waiting for you. You left me your theology, written in blood and lipstick." "Scripture," the voice said. "Twisted by cowards. I thought you'd understand the correction." "I understand judgment," Father Brown said, "but yours is personalized. Too much pride in your wrath." A chuckle, low and dry. "Pride is all that's left, Father." After the mercy failed, now he turned, slowly. The man who stepped forward was tall, gaunt, dressed in a worn black overcoat. His face was familiar, not because Father Brown had met him before, but because he was made from pieces of all the others. The wounded stare of Elias Merton, the clenched jaw of Simon Hargrave, the thin-lipped bitterness of Lydia Varn. He was the echo of everything the last 10 cases had pointed to. He was the final sentence in the long prayer of the city's sins. "I've seen you," Father Brown said, "in every room I've entered, behind every lie, watching." The man nodded. "And I've seen you, offering forgiveness to devils in disguise, praying for men who buried truth in the river." "Why now?" The man gestured to the crucifix. "Because this city doesn't deserve a savior, and yet they gave it you." "I never claimed to save anyone," Father Brown said. "No," the man spat. "You just remind them they can be." He stepped closer. His eyes, dark and hollow, burned with a fury that had outlived logic. "I watched you talk Vale's widow off a ledge. I saw you give Lydia a reason not to drown herself in whiskey. I heard you whisper a prayer over Hargrave's corpse like he was worth remembering." "He was." The man slammed a hand on the dresser. The mirror trembled. "He destroyed lives." "So did you," Father Brown said, voice quiet. "And you haven't stopped." For a long moment, the man didn't speak. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out something wrapped in a cloth. He unwrapped it slowly, like revealing a relic, and held up a small book. Leather-bound, worn, pages frayed. Father Brown knew what it was before the man said the words. Hargrave's ledger, the real one. The book that had never made it to court, the one filled with secrets bought, sold, and buried. "I took it the night he died," the man said. "I was there, watched him bleed. He didn't beg. He just smiled, as if he'd finally lost the game. And you thought that made you the winner? The man laughed. Number, just the last man standing. Father Brown took a step forward. You think this ledger gives you the right to pass judgment? I think it gives me the responsibility. No, Father Brown said. It gives you the temptation. The man froze. It tempts you to believe that because you know their sins, you're better than them. But you're not. You're worse, because they lied to protect themselves. You lie to destroy others. For a moment, the room was utterly silent. Then the man whispered, "And what do you plan to do, Father? Preach me into a jail cell?" "No," Father Brown said, stepping past him and sitting down on the edge of the bed. "I'm going to listen. That's what you came for. You've already written your confession. Now speak it." The man stared at him, breathing hard. "I killed Elias Merton, poisoned his tea. He was going to expose me. I sent the missile pages. I needed you to see the path I'd carved. I needed you to understand why." "I do," Father Brown said. "You're tired." That stopped him. "What? You're tired. You've been carrying the weight of the city's sins and calling it justice. But you're not punishing them anymore. You're just running from your own." The man looked down. His hand tightened on the ledger. "You don't have to do this anymore," Father Brown said gently. "I already did," the man whispered. "No," Father Brown said. "You punished the guilty. Now you're planning to punish yourself." The gun came out fast, small, old, tucked under the coat. But Father Brown didn't flinch. "I'm not going to prison," the man said. "No," Father Brown said. "You're going to confession." The gun wavered. "You think God wants your death?" Father Brown asked. "He wants your truth." The silence stretched. Then, with shaking fingers, the man dropped the gun. It clattered on the floor like the end of a storm. Later, Mallory arrived, took the man into custody without questions. The ledger went into evidence. The city exhaled. But Father Brown, sitting alone in room number 9, looked at the mirror again. He lied to save his soul. He traced the words with one finger, then looked down at the crucifix in his hand. Sometimes the lie wasn't the sin. Sometimes it was the salvation.